When was the last time that you actually had fun with your podcast or that you tried something new? This week, I'm going to showcase how simple it can be to deliver value, but create content in a way that doesn't tie you into like being in an office or having to set up your whole podcast studio in order to record. I want you to experience content creation in a way that feels exciting, doesn't feel boring or static, but also that shows you that it is very tightly knit into your life. I'm Anna Xavier, and this is the Podcast Space.
Hello, podcaster. Everything is fine. Everything is supposed to be the way that it is right now. So basically, what I'm doing right now is taking you on the go. And if you're listening to this, yes, that's the reason why it sounds different. If you're obviously watching this, the screen is black right now. Now, you know that I have a commitment to always being transparent about the journey, about the process, but also what works and what doesn't. And let me tell you that this is take two, because I went on a walk on my neighborhood to show you podcasting on the go, and it ended up a little different than I expected because I was running out of breath. And especially because a lot of areas in my neighborhood are not flat and my stamina is not the best. So that was not cute. So I was like, you know what? Let's do scenario number 2, which is me creating content in my back patio. I absolutely love gardening and I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm there. Now I'm like just sitting down by a rocking chair. And I want to tell you about podcasting on the go. And here's why. Podfade, which is what happens when podcasters stop podcasting completely, is very common in podcast beginners, mid-level, and even advanced podcasters. And that's because podcasters either burn out or because they just lost the joy of podcasting. And it's very common, and honestly, it doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that you didn't have a strategy that was working for you. And so ideally, by listening to these podcasts on the go, you're like, is that something that I could be doing? Could that work for me? Maybe. Now, what does it mean to podcast on the go? Many years ago, when I was creating content for a podcast that was broadcast on online radio, I did online features, or I did segments. Those segments would be kind of on the shorter side, and it would be mini documentaries, interviews, features. And something that I enjoyed very much so was to interview people from the local neighborhood. And one time, this was probably the last feature that I did, I believe. It was an actual architecture tour. And what was cool about that is that obviously we were walking around. I was capturing sounds of people. I had a recorder at the time. This was many years ago. And I didn't have an iPhone, so I used my recorder. But what it can mean to you is that you can grab your phone. I wouldn't recommend AirPods because I think that they don't record great. But you can take any corded headphones, so any headphones that come with your phone, or you can buy a lapel microphone, which is what I have right now on, and use that. And I'm actually recording it on my iPhone. Another way to podcast is to actually use your voice notes from your phone, which you can record, which is, by the way, how I'm using it to record this episode right now, and to turn those into a podcast episode. That's actually someone in my community did that during the pandemic, and I thought it was so cool. I'll be honest, I knew that people were doing it, but I never met anyone who actually did it. So that was very neat. And so you can use your phone, you can use, if you have like a Zoom recorder or something like that, you can use that too. It's really about using your life as kind of the vehicle for content creation. So if you're someone who does a lot of road trips, a lot of traveling, I've just returned from Podcast Movement, and there were a lot of people that were recording podcast episodes either in their room or in the lobby they just had like equipment that obviously was matching for the circumstances. And I want to remind you that it's not unprofessional if you give your listeners a heads up about what's going to happen. If you set up the expectations, if you tell them exactly what's next. Because no one likes being surprised. And so if you are setting the scene, they're more likely to be like us right now. Okay, you're like, okay, let's hear it. Anna, tell me more about this content creation process on the go. And so you can go on road trips and record podcast episodes in your car. I would not advise driving and podcasting. I mean, some people can do it, but I personally don't like driving. But if someone else is taking the wheel, I mean, that can work great as well. My husband normally is the one that drives, and there's effects that you can use, like actually this app that I'm using on the phone right now, it does silence and mute background noises. There's a multitude of tools that you can use to remove background noise. So you can absolutely do it on the go and experiment. And I think that what this episode is more about is reminding you that you can experiment with the process and you don't need to sit down in your office or wherever your podcast recording space is. Because a lot of times creativity gets really stale, or our creative process just kind of starts dying out because we get bored. And so if you are someone who has amazing ideas on your walk, if you are someone who loves gardening because it activates your brain, do it, right? If you have amazing conversations with a friend when you're going for walks, I would probably say runs. Let's say you live by the beach and you absolutely love going for walks by the sea. You can really harness the power of ambient sound to paint a picture, to make us feel like we're with you. At some point in my career, I consulted for a gentleman who is an arborist, and so he wanted to do a podcast about trees and plants. And I was like, it would be so cool for you to just be in your backyard and talking about things, and maybe the rustling of the bags and the sound of birds chirping or squirrels being curious and coming over. You can really be creative, but again, you never know if you don't try. And that's one of the premises of this podcast, is to give you actionable advice, lead by example, and showcase that, you can use your podcast in ways that are absolutely non-standard, but that work for you. And they may be working for your audience, but you'll never know if you don't give it a go. And so I'm giving you permission to do this. Hopefully by now you're still tuning in. And I can really drive it home, that need for creating podcast content that feels right when it feels right to you, and not necessarily having to force yourself going through a process that may actually not activate your creativity at all. So I'd love to hear from you if this was something that opened your eyes to content creation on your podcast, if you feel like you want to play around, and if so, what will you try next? I love hearing from you. My DMs are always open. On Instagram, I'm at the podcast space. And obviously, you can look into all the resources that I have on thepodcastspace.com. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. And if you can, rate and review, share it with a friend. I love to connect with you one episode at a time. So feel free to drop me a message and keep creating imperfect content that drives you forward. Bye.